In a village that feared old age more than death, there lived a man who lost his wrinkles every night. By sunrise, he was old again. But every third Wednesday, the magic demanded a price. If he wished to keep his youth, he had to spend the night beside a woman the world had mocked, discarded, or taught itself not to see, and help her remember her beauty again. Not admired, not tolerated, beautiful, and if he failed, the years would take him forever. This is the story of Aurelius Vale, the man who borrowed beauty from the moon and learned too late that beauty was never his to keep. Aurelius Vale hated mourning. He hated the heaviness in his bones. He hated the ache in his back. He hated the way his hands looked like roots pulled from hard ground. But most of all, he hated his face. Each dawn he searched it like a man checking the ruins of a burned house, hoping something had survived. Nothing ever had. His cheeks sagged. His eyes were tired. His beard, once black as midnight, had turned silver at the edges. And the beauty he had once worshipped in himself had gone, leaving behind only the cruel memory of what he had been. The people of Bracken Hollow knew him as the strange old man at the edge of the village. Some said he had once been handsome enough to make women speechless. Some said he had broken hearts for sport. Some said age had punished him faster than it punished other men because heaven itself had grown tired of his vanity. They did not know how close to the truth they were, because every evening, as the sun fell and the shadows stretched across his floorboards, Aurelius changed. The pain left first, then the stiffness, then the weight of years. His shoulders straightened, his jaw sharpened, his skin smoothed, his beard darkened, his eyes brightened with unnatural life. And by moonrise, the old man was gone. In his place stood a younger Aurelius, radiant, elegant, impossible. A man who looked like youth had chosen him and refused to leave. But it always left. It always came with dawn. And every third Wednesday, it threatened never to return at all. He kept a small calendar nailed to the wall above his bed. Each morning, before he even rose, he counted the days. His finger would trace the weeks slowly, like a man reading a sentence he already feared. When the third Wednesday was far away, he breathed easier. When it was close, he did not sleep. He would lie in the dark, staring at the ceiling, listening to the village sounds outside. Laughter from the tavern, children calling to one another, dogs barking at the moon, and he would feel the dread settle into him like cold water filling a hollow. Not because the task was painful, but because he had not yet learned to do it honestly. And the magic always knew the difference. Many years before the curse, Aurelius had been worse than vain. He had been cruel. As a young man, he believed beauty was proof of worth. He believed handsome people deserved more. More attention, more gentleness, more love, more forgiveness, more life. And those who were plain or tired or scarred or aged, he believed they should be grateful for crumbs. He carried himself like a king in a world that had never crowned him. And one autumn afternoon in the market square, his arrogance met the woman who would change his life. She was old. Her dress was patched. Her hands were rough. Her face was lined and weathered by sorrow and labor. A basket of bruised apples hung from one arm. When she reached past him to pick up a fallen coin, Aurelius stepped back as if she had dirted the air. The square went quiet. Then he laughed. Not because she had wronged him, not because she had insulted him. He laughed because others were watching. And when some of them laughed too, he felt larger somehow. Brighter, more superior. The woman slowly straightened. She looked at him, not with shame, not with anger, but with a calm so cold it stripped the pride from the moment. Then she said, "One day, boy, you will beg to keep what you waste." He smiled. That was his mistake. That night the curse began. He awoke old, and when darkness fell, he became young again. The old woman returned in a dream and gave him the law of his punishment. On every third Wednesday, he must share his night with a woman the world had rejected and restore to her the beauty the world had stolen. Not through lies, not through lust alone, but through tenderness, patience, honor, and true seeing. If disgust touched his heart, the magic would know. If pity replaced respect, the magic would know. If he treated her like a duty instead of a person, the magic would know. And if the magic knew, he would lose his youth forever. For years, Aurelius tried to find loopholes. He tried to choose women he found tolerable. He tried to perform warmth like a stage actor, hitting his marks and saying his lines. He tried to rush through the nights, counting the hours until dawn released him. But the magic was older than his cleverness. It did not measure his words. It measured his heart. And his heart, for a long time, was still the heart of the man who had laughed in the market square. At first, Aurelius obeyed out of terror. Every third Wednesday was a trial. He would walk through Bracken Hollow at dusk, not as a savior, but as a desperate man hunting for another sunrise. And he did not choose the admired women. The curse did not care for praise. It led him to the forgotten ones. The widow with the burned skin on her neck. The seamstress with the bent jaw. The innkeeper's sister whose weight made cruel men laugh behind their cups. The washerwoman whose youth had been worn away by children, grief, and years of carrying everyone but herself. He sat beside them. He listened. He held their hands. He shared warmth. He spoke to them like they were still worthy of softness. And by morning something changed. Sometimes their skin brightened. Sometimes their faces softened. Sometimes they seemed younger. Sometimes nothing visible changed at all. Yet the light in their eyes returned, and the world suddenly looked back at them differently. That was the strangest part. It was as though beauty had never truly been missing. Only recognition had. Still, Aurelius learned nothing. Not in the beginning. Because each time dawn came and he remained able to change at night, relief drowned whatever lesson might have entered him. He survived. That was all he cared about. Until he met Mara. Mara Crochet had buried her husband 10 years before Aurelius came to her door. After a kitchen fire took part of her face and neck, the village stopped looking her in the eye. Men became polite in the sharp, distant way people are polite to the visibly broken. Women spoke to her kindly but never warmly. Children stared. She wore dark veils to spare herself their glances. When Aurelius entered her house on the third Wednesday, she did not look surprised. She simply poured tea. "You are later than the moon," she said. Aurelius stiffened. "You know why I am here?" he asked. "I know men rarely come to women like me without needing something," she replied. Her words struck deeper than accusation. For the first hour, Aurelius performed kindness the way a man recites lines he has memorized but does not understand. He asked careful questions. He gave careful nods. He kept his voice soft. But Mara had lived too long with loneliness to mistake performance for sincerity. She looked at him over the rim of her cup and said, "Do not give me borrowed gentleness. I have eaten enough scraps in this life." The room fell silent. Aurelius looked at her burned scars, her trembling fingers, the sadness packed neatly into her posture like folded cloth. And for the first time in many years, shame entered him without excuse. He stopped acting. He asked her about the fire. She told him. He asked about her husband. She smiled for the first time. She told him about the songs he used to sing while chopping wood, about the way he kissed her scarred shoulder after the fire, about the way grief had become quieter but never smaller. Aurelius listened until the candles burned low. When the night grew colder, he laid a blanket across her knees. Not like a saint, not like a martyr, like someone who finally understood she was not the lesson. He was. By morning, Mara still bore her scars. But when she walked to the market that day, people moved differently around her. They greeted her. They noticed her. Some even smiled. Nothing magical had erased her history, yet somehow she looked radiant, as if dignity itself had become visible. And Aurelius, watching from a distance, felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. Not fear, regret. He stood at the edge of the market lane for a long time, watching Mara move through the crowd, watching people make room for her, watching a young girl hand her a flower without being asked. He had done nothing magical that night. He had only listened. He had only stayed. And somehow that had been enough to change the air around her. He walked home slowly, and for the first time in years, he did not count the days until the next transformation. He thought instead about all the women before Mara. the ones he had sat beside out of fear, the ones whose names he had already forgotten. He wondered if any of them had walked into a market and felt the world shift. He wondered if he had ever truly been present for any of them. The answer, when it came, was quiet and heavy. No, he had been there in body, but not in spirit. Not until Mara. There was one person in Bracken Hollow who began to suspect more than others. Her name was Alara Finch, the apothecary's daughter. She was sharp-eyed, stubborn, and far too curious for a village built on silence. Alara noticed things others did not. She noticed that Aurelius never appeared in sunlight outside his cottage. She noticed that women who spent a certain Wednesday night in tears were seen days later standing a little straighter. She noticed that the old man's window glowed long after midnight on the nights the church bells sounded different somehow. And one evening she saw him, old at dusk, young by moonrise. She should have screamed. Instead, she stepped out from behind a stone wall and said, "So the stories are true." Aurelius nearly dropped the lantern in his hand. "You should not be here," he said. "And you should not be impossible," she replied. She studied him with the boldness of youth, taking in his younger face, the same deep eyes, the same locks now dark and strong again. "Is it a curse?" she asked. He was quiet for a long moment. "It was," he said finally. "I am no longer certain what it is." Alara tilted her head. "What changed?" He looked back toward the village, toward the direction of Mara's house. "I stopped trying to survive it," he said, "and started trying to deserve it." Alara was quiet. Then she said something that would stay with him for the rest of his days. "Maybe that is what the curse always was. Not a punishment. A school." He looked at her then, this young woman with herbs in her satchel and fire in her eyes, and he felt something he had not felt in decades. Humility. Not the false kind. Not the performance of it. The real thing. The kind that arrives when you finally understand how much you have wasted. "You will not tell anyone?" he asked. She shrugged. "Who would believe me?" And she walked back into the dark, leaving him standing in the moonlight with a lantern in his hand and a new weight in his chest. Not dread this time, purpose. The next third Wednesday came sooner than he expected. Or perhaps it only felt that way because, for the first time, he was not dreading it. The curse led him to a woman named Desta, who sat alone by the village well each evening after the other women had gone home. Desta was not old. She was perhaps 40, but she carried herself like someone who had been told, in 100 small ways, that she had already used up her welcome in the world. Her husband had left her for a younger woman 3 years before. Her children had grown and moved to the city. Her neighbors were kind in the way neighbors are kind when they feel guilty for not being kinder. She sat by the well because it was the one place in the village where no one expected anything from her. When Aurelius sat beside her, she looked at him with tired eyes. "You are the old man from the edge of the village," she said. "I am," he said. "Why are you here?" He thought about lying. He thought about the careful scripts he used to use, the rehearsed warmth, the performed interest. Instead, he told her the truth. Not all of it, not the magic, but the truth that mattered. "Because I spent most of my life walking past women like you," he said, "and I am trying to learn how to stop." She stared at him for a long moment. Then she laughed. Not a polite laugh, a real one, surprised out of her. "That is the strangest thing anyone has ever said to me," she told him. "I imagine it is," he agreed. They talked until the stars moved across the sky. She told him about her children, about the garden she kept, about the book she had been reading for 6 months because she kept falling asleep after 2 pages. He told her about the village as it had been 40 years ago, about the baker who used to sing, about the winter the river froze solid and children skated on it for 3 weeks. By the time he rose to leave, the sky was beginning to lighten. Desta looked different, not younger, not magically transformed, just present, like someone who had been reminded that they existed. She reached out and touched his hand briefly. "Come back sometime," she said. "Not on a Wednesday, just to talk." He smiled. "I will," he said, and he meant it. Years passed. Aurelius continued his third Wednesday visits. But something had shifted in the nature of them. He no longer walked through the village at dusk with dread knotting his stomach. He walked with attention. He began to see the forgotten women before the curse pointed him to them. The woman who sat alone at the back of the church. The widow who always bought exactly enough bread for one. The girl who laughed too loudly at her own jokes because no one else ever laughed with her. He began to see them not as tasks, not as trials, but as people who had been made invisible by a world that only looked at what it found useful or beautiful or young. And slowly, without quite realizing it, Aurelius Vale became something he had never been in his youth. A man worth knowing. The village noticed. Not the magic. Not the transformation. Just the man himself. People began to stop and talk to him. Children who had once been afraid of the strange old man at the edge of the village began to visit, asking him to tell stories. He told them stories. Not about himself. Not about his youth or his beauty or the hearts he had broken. He told them about the women he had sat beside. About Mara and her husband's songs. About Desta and her garden. About the seamstress with the bent jaw who had once, in her youth, been the finest dancer in 3 villages. He told the stories carefully, with the names changed, with the details softened. But the truth of them remained. And the children listened with wide eyes, because children always know when a story is really true. He did not know it was the last one until it was over. The curse led him, on a cold November evening, to a woman he had not expected. It led him to Alara Finch. She was older now. Her sharp eyes were the same, but there were lines at their corners, and her hair had begun to silver at the temples. She was sitting in her father's old apothecary, which she now ran alone, sorting dried herbs by candlelight. When he knocked, she looked up without surprise. "I wondered when it would be me," she said. He sat across from her. "You are not forgotten," he said. "You are one of the most noticed people in this village." "Noticed is not the same as seen," she said quietly. He understood. They sat together for a long time. She told him about the years since her father had died. About the loneliness of being the person everyone came to for help but no one thought to check on. About the way competence could become a kind of invisibility. He listened, not to fix it, not to solve it, not because the magic demanded it, because she deserved to be heard. When the candles had burned nearly to nothing, Alara looked at him with those sharp, knowing eyes. "Is the curse lifted?" she asked. He thought about it honestly. "I do not know," he said, "but I think I finally understand what it was trying to teach me." "And what was that?" He was quiet for a moment. "That beauty is not something you possess," he said. "It is something you recognize in others. And when you learn to recognize it truly, without condition, without performance, without needing anything in return, it stops being a curse and becomes simply the way you move through the world." Alara smiled. It was a slow smile, a real one. "Then perhaps," she said, "you have finally graduated." That night, when Aurelius walked home under the cold November stars, something felt different. The air was the same. The village was the same. His old bones ached the same. But when morning came, and he reached for the small mirror above his bed, he did not search his face with dread. He simply looked. An old man looked back at him. Gray locks, tired eyes, a face mapped by years. And for the first time in longer than he could remember, he did not hate what he saw. He saw a man who had learned something. Late, imperfectly, with great cost, but learned. The village of Bracken Hollow remembered Aurelius Vale for a long time after he was gone. Not for his beauty, not for the youth he had once worn like armor. They remembered him for the way he listened, for the way he saw people, for the way he made the forgotten feel found. The women he had sat beside on those cold Wednesday nights, they remembered too. Most of them never knew about the curse. They only knew that one evening, a strange old man had knocked on their door and treated them like they mattered. And that had been enough. That had been more than enough. Because that is the truth the curse was always trying to teach him. Beauty is not in the face. It is not in the youth. It is not in the way the world looks at you. Beauty is in the act of truly seeing another person, of sitting beside them in their forgotten hours, of saying, without words, without performance, without need, I see you. You are here. You matter. Aurelius Vale learned this too late to save his youth, but not too late to save himself. And in the end, that is the only beauty that lasts. The kind you give away, the kind that costs you something, the kind that the magic, whatever magic is, was always trying to show him. Not a curse, a gift, wrapped in the hardest possible lesson, and delivered, as all true gifts are, at exactly the right time. The end.